in the prison cell. And surely Felix had cornered him about the issues of Paul. That is it. That he was kept there because there was a religious argument between Paul and his brother Jews of the religion, which all of them are partakers or were partakers of. That is it. So that is the disagreement that they had. You see, and this disagreement came because of misunderstandings about things of the Pentateuch and the Christ-like religion, which was just emerging. You know, at the emergence of the Christ-like religion, there was the Old Testament. So it is through Christ that we have the New Testament. And were it not of Christ, you and I will not have had the New Testament. So the two now are conflicting even till date. They are conflicting because there are people who want to follow the Old Testament teachings, and there are people who want to discard the teachings of the Old Testament to follow the teachings of the New Testament. And there are people who also want to discard the teachings of the New Testament to remain with the teachings of the Old Testament. And there are others who want to use both. You can now see the confusion in religion. You see, that is the confusion we have today in religion. You see, some people say we love the Old Testament, we are going to apply it in our daily lives continuously till the day we quit this world. Others say we have chosen by the New Testament, we reject the Old Testament. And others say we love both. And so we shall apply the old and the new together. But let me make it clear to us today that the Old Testament and the New Testament are reasoning between one another in similitude. What do I mean by this? The Old Testament carries the shadow of the realities that should take place in the New Testament. So the Old Testament was heralding a certain Jesus that will come and establish the New Testament. So it is just like John the Baptizer was heralding the coming of Jesus Christ. So John the Baptist was an element of the Old Testament teachings. He was a Levite, born of Zechariah. Hallelujah. And therefore, he was heralding the coming of Jesus Christ. And he said, you people make your path straight and let the mountains and the hills be leveled. For there is one of whose shoe latchets I'm not able to untie. He is greater than I. You can remember those teachings in the books of John. So therefore, you and I would know that the Old Testament was heralding the coming of Jesus. The prophets talked about Jesus to be born. Like when you read Isaiah 51, you will see how Prophet Isaiah was talking about the coming of a certain Jesus. When you read about the Genesis, Moses books, you will see how Moses was saying that somebody shall be born that shall be like unto him to address the whole world, and so on and so forth. When you read about the way of Abraham, you will see how God spoke many things to him about Jesus. When you read about the Pentateuch, you will see how Moses was heralding the coming of a certain Jesus, which finally came, or who finally came. So therefore, when people begin to make arguments between the Old Testament and the New Testament, saying they are rejecting one from the other, it is nonsense, total nonsense. I repeat, total nonsense. because the Old Testament was an announcer of the coming of the New Testament. So the Old Testament was a shadow of a real thing that was going to come. Hallelujah. And when the real thing came, the New Testament was established. And when I talk about the real thing, I mean Jesus, though it's not a thing. But when Jesus came, the New Testament now was established. I think many people through this, you'll have clarifications about, or you've had clarifications about the Old and the New Testament. And I wish to make it clear to you that many things which were written in the Old Testament repeated themselves in the New Testament. Many things that were written in the Old Testament repeated themselves in the New Testament. If you have the Bibles that teach all these things very clearly, you will see it there clearly. And you know, even the 10 Commandments, how Jesus turned them into two. Hallelujah. He did not reject the 10 Commandments, but he summarized the 10 Commandments into 2 commandments. All of you know it. You know very well how that Jesus summarized the 10 Commandments into 2. He did not reject it. Therefore means you can now understand that the Old Testament was announcing the coming of the New Testament. Both are useful. Both are useful. So therefore, if you are a sound-minded Christian, you don't need to discard one of them and say, this one is of no use. It is this one which is of importance. All of them are of importance. You know, Jesus said he did not come to break away the law, but to reinforce it. To reinforce it, to make it look much more strong or stronger. Hallelujah. So that is why you had this dissension in the Jewish, among Paul and his brother Jewish religious people. And this dissension is existing even nowadays. It exists even nowadays. You see, those people who are called the Muslims, most of them love but the teachings of Moses. They love the Mosaic teachings. And we who are Christians, we love the Jesuit teachings. And we love to follow them. But at one time again, the Jews are knowledgeable of the things of the New Testament. And also, many of the Christians of the New Testament are knowledgeable of the things of the Old Testament. So therefore, both of them have but one God. There are no two gods. The God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are one. Therefore, the very person who inspired the writings of the Old Testament is the very person who inspired the writings of the New Testament. Hallelujah. And that is why in the books of the prophets, you have the books of the prophecies in the Old Testament. In the New Testament is called the Revelation. So either you call it revelation or you call it prophecy. All of them are similar and co-equal one to another. Hallelujah. So this clarification need to be made so that these people who are making dissensions, disagreements among us today should have to throw those disagreements aside. They have to nullify their disagreements and look at all things as one. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and besought him. So these people who were the high priest, who were much learned about the things of the Old Testament, were against Paul, who was preaching about Jesus building up the New Testament. And many of you know that most of the books in the New Testament were written by Apostle Paul. If you have a ranking, you see that Apostle Paul wrote most of the books in the New Testament. Hallelujah. And you have John and you have Matthew. That is how you can relate how these people came out with this. You know, the synoptic gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and others now followed by the letters of Paul. Hallelujah. So now you can see the argument stood between those who were much versed with the things of the Old Testament against those new things which were emerging that Apostle Paul was preaching about Jesus Christ. So you can now see that the actual argument that we are following here is about the new teachings against the old teachings, and the old teachings against the new teachings. You see it, you see where the argument is. So therefore, this time around, that is why those people brought a complaint against Paul unto the governor, 3, and desired favor against him, that he will send him to Jerusalem, laying wait in way to kill him. So people plan to kill Paul as an ambush if he will be sent for trial before Festus. So they made a plan. You know, in the earlier chapter, you read how the son of Paul's sister had to reveal the plan of his assassination by ambush by the very Jews. There were 40 of them who laid wait in an ambush to kill Paul if he was going to be translated for a hearing before Festus. And this plan was leaked, you see. And last time I did exhort you to the fact that God fights your battles, the ones you know and the ones you don't know. So Apostle Paul wouldn't know that his sister's son will hearken to the plot to kill him, and he had to leak the secret to Paul first, and to the centurion, moreover to the governor. Hallelujah. 4. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that himself would depart shortly thither. So that he said, let Apostle Paul be held in the prison cell. You know, this type of keeping that they kept Paul was a preventive detention. It was a preventive detention in the sense that they were preventing him from being killed. So they had to keep him in a cell. You see, they had to keep him in a cell before they would like to hear him. So it was a preventive detention. So unlike, as last time I did tell you, when you run to the police station having made an accident or killed somebody, for fear of the fact that the angry mob may rise up against and kill you, you might run to the police and report yourself that you've caused an accident, somebody has died, but for fear of the fact that the mob can rise up in town and kill you, you are running away that they could lock you up for a preventive detention. So it is not all the time that when someone is locked up in the cell, he is already condemned. Hallelujah. Let them therefore, said he, which among you are able, go down with me and accuse this man, if there be any wickedness in him. So they said, get ready so that we can go down together and then prepare your statements, prepare your evidences. Because, you know, even nowadays, people levy false accusations against innocent people without any proof, without any exhibit, without any evidence. This thing had started many years before. This is heresy. This is blackmail. Whatever that does not have evidence is a heresy or a blackmail. It is backstabbing. So these people were backstabbing Paul for a religion of which they were not conversant with. Therefore, they were ignorant of the things of Jesus Christ, but they were much conversant with the things of the Old Testament. So having nothing to prove themselves about the accusation levied against Paul, they had to make a backstabbing statement that he should be killed. 6. And when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down unto Caesarea, and that the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. So he took the place of the magistrate, Festus, and commanded that they should bring Paul for a hearing, so that Paul could make a statement before him, and that the audience will be able to listen to him, and also the judgment people who are collegial to listen to him about his claims and his defense. Hallelujah. 7. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about and laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which could not be proven. You can now see it. So all the accusations, Paul profaned the temple, Paul stirred up a crowd to cause a rioting in the city. Apostle Paul never caused us, the people to riot in any way. He didn't. He didn't cause any riot. He didn't cause any upheavals. But the point is that the people had to raise points against Paul which were irrelevant. There were no proofs, there were no exhibits, no evidences against Paul. Yet they were like backstabbers. 8. While he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar have I offended any at all. He said, the law which you preach, which is also the Pentateuch, which is the Torah, I have not offended anything against it, which means I did not preach anything contrary to the law, which is the Torah, which is also the Pentateuch. I did not preach anything against it. I don't say anything contrary to what it teaches. I don't say anything about the Mosaic teachings contrary to it. What I said was about the new doctrine of Jesus Christ. And he said, even Caesar himself, who is the king, I have not said anything contrary or against Caesar. You see, who is the king. But these people had to raise up accusations against Paul, which were very, very grievous, that they were seeking for his soul to be laid to the dust. 9. But Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul and said, wilt thou go up to Jerusalem, and there be judged of these things before thee? So Festus now said, please, would I send you to Jerusalem so that you can make a defense before your brethren, the Jews, so that you can answer for yourself, because even the Jews at Jerusalem, not only the Jews in Caesarea, are accusing you of things which without evidence. 10. Then Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as thou very well knowest. He said, I'm standing before Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be tried. Where I ought to what? To be tried. You see, that is why we have courts. That is why we have courts. That is why we have police stations. And that is why we have other stations whereby matters are tried. That's why we have state councils. And that is why we have other higher areas where even the native or village councils are serving as places to try matters in order to arrive at decisions that can solve certain problems. Hallelujah. So you can now see from the village level, councils are established to trial issues, to make sure that there is peace among the people. And therefore, Paul said, I am standing before the judgment seat of Caesar, where I ought to be tried. 11. For if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I wouldn't refuse. He said, if I had done anything that by you think I should be killed, I do not run away from death. I will surrender myself to be killed, because in effect I am worthy of death, given that I am guilty of the offense that deserves death. Therefore, I would not refuse dying. But in so long as I am not convinced, or I have not done anything wrong, and you cannot convict me of wrongdoing, and he said, then I would have none of you to condemn me. Hallelujah. But if there be none of these things on, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal and say, none of you can send me to my brothers the Jews to kill me. So I appeal unto Caesar. Now, that is why you have appeal courts. This matter here has to do with justice, This matter has to do with justice. So if you have a matter in the court of first instance, for example, and the judgment which is arrived at by the magistrate or the presiding judge, thereby you being not satisfied, you can sue back in the appeal court. And the appeal court now will hold a hearing over your matter so that you can be retried. You can be tried again. And during your retrial in the appeal court, you may come out victorious over the charges laid against you or over the conviction which was levied against you by the magistrate in the court of first instance. And after the court of first instance, you have the appeal court, and after the appeal court, you have the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, you have the last, that is the limit, the highest of the courts that we have. For example, in Cameroon, we have these courts: the magistrate court or the court of first instance, you have the court of appeal, you have the court which is the Supreme Court, and you have also other courts which are added to it. But looking at a smooth way that the area is set up in Cameroon without branches, because there are little other branches of courts. Like you have the military court, you have the other court which was just newly made for officials, and so on, so forth. So 12. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, "Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar you will go." He said, okay, since you have appealed unto Caesar, which should be unto you like an appeal court, then unto Caesar will I send you. So he never stopped him from going to the appeal court. In the same manner, when you have a case in the court of first instance, nobody stops you from making an appeal to the appeal court. 14. And when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king, saying, there is a certain man left in bonds by Felix. Now Festus was saying that this man, Paul, was left in the prison cell by Felix, his predecessor. 15. About whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priest and the elders informed me, desiring that I should try him. So the Jews and the elders said, let me try this man, because the man seems a thorn in their flesh. 16. To whom I answered, it is not the manner of the Romans to deliver any man to die before he should be tested. Hallelujah. So Festus answered them and said, it is not of the Roman manner of rulership or manner of trying judicial matters, that a man has not been tried, he has not defended himself, yet he's sent into prison. But there are countries in the world today that many people have already been sent into prison. Some of them are 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, being not sentenced in the court. There have not been any defense against them for themselves before the courts of trial, but they are already serving prison sentences. And it comes to the fact that in some of these situations, people having served about 15, 20 years in prison without trial, after they should have been tried, they are given only 5 years. So if you add the 20 years of lockup without trial plus the 5, they should have sentenced them for 25 years. And these people who are the Romans said, no, with us the Romans, we do not do that. Before we make somebody enter the prisons, then we should have tried him, he should have made a defense of himself, and after that, we now put him into prison. And therefore, his detention was not a matter of years. So they hurried up to make sure that it would not make a matter of years before his trial. But today, in various countries in the world, you will see people spending 10, 15, 20 years in prison without trial. The Romans wouldn't do that, and they didn't find it just even before the sight of God. Hallelujah. So when we do things in this world, we do not understand that there is somebody unto whom also we shall render an account. Hallelujah. 17. Therefore, when they were come hither without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought forth. He said, so I sat on the judgment seat and wished that he should defend himself. 18. Against whom, when the accuser stood up, they brought none accusation of such things as I supposed. Festus said, the things which I thought this man would have done or had done, desired him to be killed, I did not find any. Festus said, of their religion, they do argue. All of them are Jews. So of their religion, they argue. So how would I? I'm not a Jew. I'm a Roman. How then would I meddle myself into Jewish religion and Jewish beliefs? Perhaps in Rome also, they had their own beliefs which could be contrary to the Jewish beliefs or to the Jewish religion. So Festus said, no, I will not partake in these things because their religion differs from mine and their manner of belief also differs from mine. And therefore, I cannot lay any accusation against this man. For I thought that they will say Paul had killed somebody, or Paul has strangled somebody, or Paul has beaten somebody, or Paul has insulted somebody. Whatever be the crime, they would not bring before his seat. And therefore, he did not find any reason. He did not find any reason why he ought to be sentenced to death. 19. There are certain questions against him about their own word, religion, and what was Paul preaching about a certain Christ, according to him, about a certain Jesus who was nailed on the cross and died and was buried. Presupposedly, he did not resurrect at all. Because many people thought actually, and if you go right now into Israel, you will still have many people who say that Jesus actually died and never resurrected. Even right in Israel, you have people who are still holding on this argument. Many of you know that when after Jesus had resurrected, the soldiers around were given bribe to tell people that actually his disciples came and stole his body away. And so many people still hold that no, Jesus never resurrected. Now when Paul was preaching a resurrected Jesus, this caused the disagreement between his brothers, the Jews, over the same religion. 20. And because I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked him whether he would go to Jerusalem and that he there be judged. Say, okay, if you can let me say Jerusalem, then now when you go, you can be tried. 21. But when Paul had appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus Caesar, I commanded him to be kept till he might be sent to Caesar. Now, Festus was saying that had it mean Paul were actually satisfied with the trying that he was going to carry out, he wouldn't have sent him to Caesar. But given that he had appealed to Caesar, he had no other objection than to send him to Caesar where he had made his appeal. So that Caesar, being the supreme, according to his choice, will be able to make a decision over this case. Hallelujah. 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 That was actually the dissension among them. 22. Then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear that man myself tomorrow. And said he, that thou shalt hear him. So when Agrippa visited Festus and they discussed over the issue, King Agrippa also said, okay, that being the case, me too, or me also, I'm interested in hearing the defense of Paul and the complaint of his brethren, the Jews, and the religious leaders and the scribes and whatsoever. 23. And on the morrow when Agrippa was come, and Bernice and great pomp, and was entered into the palace of hearing with the chief captains and the principal men of the city at Festus' commandment, Paul was brought forth. So when Bernice and Agrippa and Festus, three key men, sat at the Festus judgment place as to hear what Paul would make his defense, then Festus called Paul to be brought forth to make his defense against his accusers. Hallelujah. 24. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all men which are here present with us, ye see this man, about whom all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both at Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. They said, no, what Paul is doing or teaching condemns him. Paul teaching Jesus condemns him. You can hear that. If they themselves, the Jews, and Jesus likewise was a Jew, condemned Paul, they equally condemned Jesus. Reason with me. It is the very Jews that condemned Jesus, the priests and the scribes. They are the ones that condemned Jesus, that he ought not to live but to die. I say Jesus was a Jew, and his own fellow brethren condemned him to death. In the like manner, Apostle Paul, being a Benjaminite, one of the descendants of Israel or Jacob, was condemned to death. But these are the things which Jesus told Paul, that you are going to suffer many things on my account, while he was going to Damascus in Syria. Jesus told him, you will stand many things by which perhaps you might be killed, as I was killed. For my name's sake, you will be trialed in many areas, and your life will be put at risk many a times. But I will not depart from you to set you free in all your trials, your tribulations, and the temptations, and all the torments that you were going to go through for my name's sake. It is the same thing as you and I today. We can stand to be tried because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's true that many people did not believe that Jesus resurrected. And what makes me feel a little bit unhappy with these Jews is that they loved the Mosaic teachings, but none of them would know whether Moses died or not. You see, none of them knows whether Moses died or not. They don't know whether Moses died or not. And if at all they knew, none of them can point where Moses was buried. None of them. You see, what you don't know, you give names. What you know, you condemn. What you don't know, you give names. You blaspheme. But what you know, you condemn. That's human way of doing things. You see, so you can see how the Jews were actually divided in belief. They were the Jews who followed Jesus' teachings. And to that point, they said Jesus had a sect of the Nazarenes. Jesus belonged to the sect of the Nazarenes. And when you read back in this chapter 23 here, you will see how Paul too was called a member of the sect of the Nazarenes. You will see it there. So, the emergence of the Christian doctrine was regarded as a sect. Initially, it was regarded as a sect. In Cameroon, we have sects. We regard the Rosicrucian order as a sect. We regard the Freemason as a sect. We regard Horus as a sect. We regard other secret cults as sects. So in the like manner, these people regarded Jesus' sect as an evil one, not a good thing at all. So therefore, when Apostle Paul was preaching Jesus, they had to condemn him because they believed that Jesus was evil. And therefore, whatever thing that Paul would teach would also be evil. And that is why they had no proof to put before the governors against Paul. In the same way, the priests, the scribes, and the Jews themselves had nothing as proof to condemn Jesus before Pilate, before Pontius Pilate. And remember that Pontius Pilate was also a Roman governor. Okay, these things happened when the Roman Empire was expanded right down to Israel. Hallelujah. These things had not ended at that time alone. Right now, as I'm preaching here, there are people who know that Christianity is not worthy at all. You know why the Muslims apply the Sharia law? An eye for an eye, teeth for tat. You see, in the Sharia law, you bust my eye, I bust your own. You broke my teeth, I broke your teeth. If you cut my hand, I cut your hand. If you cut my foot, I cut your foot. Hallelujah. You can remember the issue of this woman who had committed adultery, and by the Mosaic teachings, it was said that any woman who is caught red-handed, I mean, in the act proper, the person should be stoned to death. Yeah. You remember that now? Yes, you remember it. And then these Jewish people took upon themselves to bring this woman to Jesus. And they said, you see, by the Mosaic teachings, this woman ought to be killed. And because we caught her red-handed, carrying out the act of adultery. What does this mean? She was sleeping with a married man, or she herself was married, but she was sleeping with somebody else out of her marriage home. Hallelujah. And by the Mosaic teachings, we ought to stone her to death. And let me remind you that the capital punishment that the Jews had was stoning. By France, you had guillotine. And the capital punishment for France, for the French, was beheading you using the guillotine. That is how it was. And perhaps that is how it is till today in France, but I don't know. In Rome, the capital punishment was by nailing you on the cross. Take note of these things. So therefore, the punishment which was capital that they levied unto Jesus was a Roman type capital punishment, nailing on the cross. But if it were the Jewish type of capital punishment, they were only going to stone him to death. Remember that in the previous areas where Apostle Paul said he even consented when the Jews were stoning Stephen to death. So the Jews were stoning Stephen to death. Paul consented. He was there. He even held the address. He stoned Stephen to death, Apostle Stephen to death, and they stoned him to death. That was the Jewish manner of capital punishment which they gave Apostle Stephen. Read your scriptures and get these things through. And you will see into it that Jesus was not given the capital punishment as per what was ascribed by the laws of the Jewish people. But he was killed by the laws and manner of capital punishment of the Romans. Get this very clear. Hallelujah. And in the like manner, the Jewish people were looking ahead to stone Paul to death. 26. Of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord, who is the biggest man, Caesar. And he said, so therefore, I would that he be tried, so that at least I would have heard him say something that I may write down and also have evidence of what he has said to present to Caesar, the king, or the emperor. Hallelujah. And then Agrippa and Haman said to some, and after examination I might have something to write. Yes, 27, and which is the last verse. For it seemeth to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal to signify the crimes laid against him. So I have no reason to make somebody a prisoner without having had any evidence by which he should be sentenced to jail. Hallelujah. Now, this lesson is about justice. It's about justice. How do the nations do their justice system differs one nation from another? You know, in some countries, you are jailed before being tried. You see, by the Roman method, they know that a person stands as a suspect until he's tried and found guilty. Then he can be convicted and sentenced to serve his prison terms. In other countries also, it is vice versa. It is left for you now to choose. And Jesus himself, who will stand at the judgment seat, by whom Paul preached, said, the dead and the living shall be raised and shall be tried by Jesus himself. After what time you and I will be cast into hellfire for wrongdoing, for breaking the laws and principles and precepts of Jesus Christ. And if we are not found guilty of anything worthy of going to hell, we shall be translated into heaven, where you will spend the rest of your life enjoying. Now, we who are in this world, we know that that is what Jesus has said. The question is, are we following the way Jesus would have done it in this world? Is that what we are following? And if that is not what we are following, are we against Jesus or are we for Jesus? You can now see for yourselves. And many of us who do these things, if they did it to us, we too will not be satisfied, will not be happy. If Jesus had said there will be no resurrection of the dead, there will be no trial, everyone will just be sent to hell, how would you feel? How would you feel? And that is why when we do things, we need actually to refer to the Bible to see whether what we are doing has some support biblically, so that we avoid of errors depending on the way God himself, who created us, who is the owner of all things in heaven and on earth, will be satisfied. Hallelujah. So we need actually to rectify certain things that we do to the people, of which if they were done unto us, we ourselves will be dissatisfied. Let us look at the way Jesus said it. He said, all of you will be trialed, and after that you may be condemned, or you'll be set free. But today, without trial, your brothers and your sisters and whosoever is put in prison to serve even longer jail term than prison sentence. This is where I make my summary of what we have learnt this morning. 1. Festus succeeded Felix as governor of Caesarea. 2. He moved to Jerusalem to make a visitation. 3. An ambush was laid down to kill Paul. 4. Men of responsibility were asked to stand to lay claims against Paul. 5. Festus then tried Paul in Caesarea. 6. Jews moved from Jerusalem to Caesarea to lay charges against Paul. 7. The Jews accused Paul without any evidence. 8. Paul never did anything against the law, the temple, nor the emperor Caesar. 9. Paul accepted that in so long as he had appealed to Caesar, he should there be tried. 10. Paul having appealed to be tried by Caesar, so Festus ordered his trial. 11. Festus told King Agrippa that it wasn't of Roman custom to sentence somebody to prison without trial. 12. The disputation was solely on things of religion, the Old and the New Testament teachings. 13. Paul remained in prison under Festus because he appealed unto Caesar. So Festus did not keep Paul in prison or in the cell because he needed bribe, but simply because he appealed to Caesar. 14. Agrippa also tried Paul in the presence of Festus and Bernice. 15. Festus said that it was unreasonable to sentence Paul without evidence or proof. This is where I am going to suspend my teaching to take some light breath, and you and I should have learned about the things of justice systems round about the world and how God will want it to be done, because he himself sitting on the throne has said that that is the rightful manner by which himself will try us. Hallelujah. So I call off this session right now and return about 2 minutes later